Welcome to Worldwatch TV. I'm here today with Professor Dirk Messner, who is director of the DIE, the Deutsches Institut für Entwicklungspolitik, or German Development Institute. Dirk, why don't you tell us a few things about your institute and the work that you're doing there?
Yeah, we are a research institution. We work with around 100 researchers in our institute doing research on traditional development policy, but also on global development issues. So it's about energy, it's about migration, it's about climate change. And based on our work, we also work as advisors to our government and to governments around the world and international organizations.
Interesting. And one of your current projects that I found on your website is on development policy questions for the future. What are those key questions of the future?
Yeah, one of the key questions is obviously the climate change issue, because our observation and data are showing that we are making progress in terms of poverty alleviation, actually. One interesting data there is that now 600 million people of the 1 billion people who we define as absolutely poor are living in middle-income countries. And the chance to bring down the poverty rate in these middle-income countries, China, Brazil, India, is better, of course, than in Sudan. So we do have the chance to bring the poverty ratios down. But the climate change issue is a middle-term issue which might destroy all these kind of successes. So climate change, low-carbon development is one of our major challenges which we see.
And what do you think are some of the key challenges in this particular area about climate change, to move forward on climate change, so to make sure that it's not in the way of further development and improving the quality of life for people in developing and emerging countries?
Yeah, we did a big study, which we published now, this time in Washington actually, on the low-carbon transformation, on low-carbon transformation processes in the global economy. And we call these transformation processes big transformation efforts which are needed. Because we have to act really rapidly. We need to peak with our global emissions within the next 10 years. If we don't do so, we can't achieve the 2 degrees Celsius target. So it's about speed. And then it is about scaling up, because we do make progresses and see those in many countries, but we are far too slow. So speeding up and scaling up is really important. This is about development policy, it's about international cooperation, it is about China, it is about Europe, because in Europe we do have ambitious roadmaps towards low carbon, but we need to bring this together with efforts in other parts of the world.
And what are your ideas that your institute develops, how this can be done best? What's the role of different key actors in this global challenge?
Yeah, what is interesting to observe is that after Copenhagen, and we all left Copenhagen in 2009 frustrated because the big deal hasn't emerged there. But interestingly, after this multilateralism which failed, we see many dynamics on the national levels. And many countries which before argued that low carbon is something which OECD countries might do and should do, I'm talking about the Brazils and Chinas and Indias, Indonesia, South Africas, are now moving even faster than the developing countries into the right direction. And this is why we are
faster than the developed countries.
Faster than the US anyway.
Yeah.
But even faster than Europe or European countries also. So we argue that we need to focus on the global climate regime, it's important, but we also have to think on, we call it pioneering alliances for low carbon development. So bringing Europe and China and India and Brazil and others together to make big steps together.
So you're concentrating on rather a smaller number of key countries. Yeah. And you're trying to figure out how these countries can cooperate closer from kind of a bottom-up perspective at first, and then create the global governance regime, hopefully, in a few years down the line. Is that would that be the ultimate goal? Or?
We say that we should do it both in parallel. Okay. So it is about Durban. We should try to bring the global regime forward, the climate regime, but at the same moment, we also need to build these clubs, low-carbon clubs. And the major idea is, if we would be able to bring, let's say, only Brazil, China and Europe together, building up emission schemes, bringing those together and invest jointly in R&D and education towards low-carbon transformation, this would be a huge challenge and a huge signal for the rest of the world, because then 40% of the global economy would go into this direction. So the idea is to organize something like a tipping point in the global economy, which makes clear for other actors that this is a serious thing now.
What gives you the most hope? What do you see? What gives you the most hope that we will be able to achieve that?
Actually, we come up in our report with three big good news. The first big news is we are optimistic in terms of innovation and technology. We do have the technologies now. We didn't have these technologies after Chernobyl, for example, 86. We would not have been able to make a low carbon transformation 20 years ago. Now we can do it technologically. The second important point is we can finance that. We calculated it, we brought all the data together, we can finance it. It is in a magnitude of 1.5 to 2.5% of the global economy. It is about upfront investment, but we can do that. It's not something which bring all our economies down.
It's probably even cheaper than not doing anything.
It is anyway much cheaper than not doing anything. And the third important element is I think we have a very interesting competition now between China and Europe. In Europe we do have ambitious roadmaps towards low carbon, and we do have the same, in some areas even more ambitious, in China. And this helps China to move forward because they are arguing the Europeans are going anyway down this road, and in Europe it's the same. So it helps us in both regions and countries to make progress, and this is a very important dynamic.
Very interesting. So that gives us hope. I've seen that you're speaking today at an event of the Transatlantic Climate Bridge here in town, so supported by the German government, on realizing green growth and sustainable economic development. What's the key thesis you're going to throw out there today, if you give us a peek preview?
Yeah, that's the same point actually.
Yeah.
We try to convince that the transformation is possible, and we try to convince people also here in the US that if we do it together, we can make big steps forward. We found one interesting data. We did a lot of calculations there, and we demonstrate that if we would be able to realize 20% of our global energy production based on renewables, we would see a convergence between the prices for renewable energy-based energy production with fossil-based energy production. 20%. We are now around 2 to 3% in terms of renewable energies in the global economy. If you would bring the US and China together, making this step rapidly, with big investments, we could manage these kind of cost problems easily.
I think the numbers that you gave are for new renewable energies.
Yeah.
That is excluding, of course, we need to say large hydro and some of the conventional.
Yeah, it is wind, it
and
is solar, it's solar
geothermal.
thermal,
Yeah.
of course.
Yes. I looked up your teaching curriculum at the University of Duisburg-Essen, and I found very exciting themes you're dealing with that, of course, have been very important also for Worldwatch in the past. And one of them is really on one of the themes here you're trying to get a grasp on is in our world economic system, who are the winners and the losers of globalization? Tell us a little bit about your insights there.
Yeah. No, the interesting thing there is that when our globalization debate started, let's say at the beginning of the 90s, if you go into Google, if you put in globalization, at the beginning of the 90s, hundreds of thousands of articles and papers pop up globalization. And the first wave in this discussion was very clear in terms of who are the winners and who are the losers. Charles Kapschen wrote 2 books about that.
Yeah.
The first one was on globalization is westernization. The second was on globalization is Americanization.
Okay.
So what we see now is the winners of globalization are Asian, and the winners of globalization are some middle-income countries in Latin America and in Africa also. So Brazil is important, South Africa is also important. So interestingly, globalization is not driven by Western countries, it's now driven by non-OECD countries. One interesting data here. In 1990, when the wall fell down, 1989 of course, 11th of November, when the wall fell down, so in this time we had worldwide 1.3 billion people defined as global middle classes, people with an income of 6,000–7,000 euros per year, and 80% of those 1.3 billion have been living in OECD countries. Today, 50% of global middle classes are living in OECD countries, 50% in non-OECD countries, and we are now, global middle classes, 3.5 billion already. In 2030 we will be around 4.8 billion, and 80% of those people are living in non-OECD countries. So these are the driving engines of the global economy. These people will also define what global democracy is about, what global governance is about, what global cooperation is about, where the cultural dimensions of global cooperation are. So we need to learn in the Western countries that these power shifts are really huge.
Very interesting. Final question. Now, you as a professor, of course, you're seeing this individual trends, but you're trying to lift it then on a more abstract level. You're trying to observe practice and then try to formulate a theory around it. I know that you have for many years dealt with development theory. These new trends, what does it mean for your understanding of the world as a whole, from the theoretical angle?
I think that we have to rethink the whole development theory debate, because it was, at the end of the day, it was Western driven. It was about learning from developed countries for developing countries. And now in the real interesting areas, we have been talking about climate-friendly development, we have been talking about low-carbon development, decarbonizing. We are all developing countries, actually. And maybe some of these so-called developing countries might leapfrog much more rapidly towards low carbon than we do, because we are path dependent in terms of our transport structures and urban structures and energy structures. So in the global financial crisis now, the money is not in the US, the money is not in Europe. We are indebted. China could make it. So the picture is really quite different.
And those are also the biggest markets in the century. If you look at energy, China and India, it's at least in the second part of the century. In the case of India, so that gives a lot of hope that then in these countries it wouldn't be so much a transition than a creation. It's building something new, building new systems, which often is easier than retrofitting what you already have. Would you agree on that? Or?
I would agree on that, and I would cite John Maynard Keynes, actually. He said in one of his fantastic writings that creating new things and theories is not so difficult, actually. The really difficult thing is to forget the old ones. Forgetting the old concepts. This is also about path dependency, and you are right. Countries which are now growing so fast and building up new markets, for them it might be easier to go into these new directions than in our countries.
Fascinating. Thank you very much for coming by at
Worldwatch.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you.